Right, folks, it's Matt here from the Ask the Ard podcast. Before we get stuck into today's podcast, I'd just like to ask you a favour. If you've ever got any value from this podcast, you could do us a massive favour by going to wherever you get your podcasts from and subscribing to the show and leaving us a review. You can also follow us on Instagram at go-rover, and that would be fantastic. So let's jump right into today's. So folks, today I am delighted to have Chris Penman from Start Consulting Engineers on the podcast. Chris is a structural engineer and specialist in the design of things such as curtain walling, buildings, glass structures, and Chris has helped hundreds of people just like you make sure that their home extensions and alterations are well specified, but most importantly safe, as we will get onto in a minute. He's also the best-selling author of Safe as Houses, and he's owner of the massively successful Ask the Engineer Facebook page, and also, interestingly, creator of the FoodBank cryptocurrency. Now, if you don't know about crypto, and I don't know anything about it, in the initial 8 weeks in circulation, FoodBank Crypto increased their investors' money 28 times whilst managing to raise over £50,000 for FoodBank. So Chris is doing a wonderful job there, and that is fantastic. So after that, welcome, Chris. Thanks a lot for agreeing to come on to this.
Oh my God, that's quite a build-up.
Well, we try. So I can tell from the little bit of research I've done, and I have actually read your book. I must admit, I bought it about, I don't know, was it a year ago that came out now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was
maybe 18 months ago.
Yeah, it was something like that. Bought it. Flicked through, looked at the chapter headings, and I thought, that's fantastic. That's going to be really, really useful for the business and all sorts of things. And but yesterday was the first time I've actually read it cover to cover. And what I like about it, and I'd encourage all the listeners, I'll put a link in the description. I'd encourage all the listeners to go and grab a copy of that if they're embarking on this journey, because it's written just the way you speak. No nonsense, no bullshit, straight in there. Absolutely spot on. So yeah. I can tell you love your job, Chris. Is that right?
Yeah, I like what I do. I like engineering. I like problem solving. The book itself is mostly questions that people have asked on the Facebook page, because we get quite a lot of the same types of questions. People who've got a crack in their house and they want to know why there's a crack there. They've got some signs of movement, or they built a house extension and maybe they built the house extension illegally, didn't bother getting a building warrant for it, and now they're selling their house. But to be honest, I wrote the book so long ago now that I'm struggling to remember all the topics that we've got in there. But basically, they tend to be common questions that people have, and a little bit of background about obviously why you should hire professionals to do your work instead of just either doing it yourself or getting a student to do things, because quite apart from the fact that you want somebody with insurance to do these things, you don't get a good service. I don't think. No,
and it's interesting, isn't it, that the Ask the Engineer Facebook page is just as big as it is, because that's almost like validation of people casting around looking for free advice rather than being prepared to pay a professional. Is that something you come across fairly regularly?
Well, on the Facebook page, yeah. We've got, I think, 8,500 followers on Facebook. They're all just organic followers. None of them are bought or anything like that. No. They're from all over the world. We've done work in America, in Africa, like literally anywhere. Because at the end of the day, engineers just maths. It's still just gravity. It's still just steel. We have to find what grades of materials you can get in each country. But generally speaking, people just want some free advice. A lot of the time, just on, can I do this? You know, nothing super complicated. It tends to just be I'm thinking about doing this. Is that even practical? But most engineers will charge them for even considering the question. If you phone up a consultant, that consultant's not going to give you their time for free. And in fairness, on the Facebook page, we do charge for some things. If somebody wants me to do a design for something, then I'll charge them for that.
Yeah,
but
quite right too.
If they just want to go away and talk about things and get a little bit of free advice, then That's the whole point of it. It's mostly just to stop people doing stupid things.
Yeah.
I know that might seem a bit odd, but having went into an awful lot of people's houses and seen DIY alterations and things like that, people do some mind-blowingly stupid things to the house. And the Facebook page is there to try and stop people doing some very stupid things to their house.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, reading through your book, there's a lot of crossovers with the pain points that we experience with our customers, that our customers experience. And I guess, why do you think people underestimate design team costs? Because the feeling I get is that architects in particular are held in high esteem, and this isn't a dig at architects, it's just the way it is. Architects, lawyers, doctors, they're all held in very high esteem. And I end up in situations all the time where I'm having a conversation with a client, trying to find a little bit more about their project, and they're throwing back at me all the time, well, the architect said this, or the architect said that, or that's not what the architect said. And I guess, is that the same for engineers?
Yeah, that's the same for us. I think a lot of that is that architects and doctors and people like that, they deal with the public. They're good at dealing with public. Engineers are not so good. We're good at maths, right? By and large, the typical structural engineer will be somebody who sits at a desk, doing maths, doing drawings or whatever, but he won't really be facing the public or interacting with the public at all. You know, the most he'll get is maybe going to meetings and talking to an architect or something like that. But the engineer will not have an awful lot of I want to say experience, but it's not really experience. The architect is better placed to talk to people, if you like. Engineers, by and large, like doing maths.
Which I guess is, that, I mean, and that's a great thing. It's great that the architect is that customer interfacing unit. They just need to make sure they give them the right advice up front. And I mean, quite often, the number of times we have people come to us and it's just a complete shock to them that they've got to do a tree survey or they've got to do an ecological survey. And you think, well, all that information is out there, and I guess it's the same in terms of building warrants and things like that. The information is out there. It's publicly available, isn't it? So
it is, but the thing is that people don't generally hire actual qualified architects. Right, actual qualified architects are working in big architectural firms, designing schools and hospitals and offices and things like that. The people who are involved in doing domestic house extensions are more likely to be an architectural student or an architectural technician, right, not an actual chartered architect. So these people will do AutoCAD drawings, they'll have lots of standard details, and they'll do a good job of doing the interior layout and things like that. But they probably don't know basically about tree surveys and things like that, because somebody else has to deal with that stuff, right? They do the plans, they give it to the client, they put it up to building control, and then when the question gets asked, they're like, oh, that's not me. And they've already been paid by that point, so they don't need to deal with the impact of the lack of knowledge and the lack of kind of advice that they've given to the client. The client now has a problem, and they need to find a specialist to fix that problem. And it's just, you'll find that as well. You'll find that people will phone you up and they'll be looking for a solution to a problem that they didn't even know that they had.
Yes.
And they'll not want to spend the money on it because they've already allocated all of the budget for their new kitchen and things like that. So they don't have a fee to go away and get a tree survey done, because that money is allocated to chrome light switches or, a tap that boils the water or something like that.
Yeah, they think once the design is finalised, that's it. There's no other boxes to tick there. And I guess that's why there's a suite of architects that we work with regularly who are a delight to work with, and we do CPD with them on ecological and tree matters and things. And they go into it well informed, and they'll give the client all the right information up front, which makes our lives an awful lot easier. So I'm going to take you back in time just a little bit. Just for a while, just briefly. And it's always interesting to me how people have got to where they are today. So, I mean, what was the moment that you decided to be an engineer? Who inspired you to be an engineer, or was it just one of those things that you fell into by accident?
My dad was a maths teacher and techie teacher.
Right.
Right. So my dad ended up being the head of the technical department in the school that I went to.
Yeah.
So he would also teach maths as well. So for all intents and purposes, even from when I was small, we would have people coming over to our house to get taught maths or techie drawing or something like that. And unsurprisingly, I was very good at techie drawing, and I was also very good at maths. I'm terrible at English, and although I've written a book, but those two things just came easy to me because I'd spent like even my primary school years watching my dad teach people maths, and you know what it's like. Your dad's doing drawings, so you go away and start doing drawings and things like that. It's just easy.
Yeah,
you know, that was basically it. And I enjoyed trying to figure out how things worked, you know, like taking mechanical things to bits and stuff like that. I actually went to university to study mechanical engineering.
Right.
And I lasted 1 semester there, and it was so dull. I honestly thought it was going to be about designing cars and engines and stuff, and it just was not.
No.
So I went along to the civil engineering department, and they had wave machines and earthquake machine and stuff like that. So I was like, this is definitely a place for me. And then I found that I didn't particularly like civil engineering either. But so I moved on to the structures course, and that just made more sense to me. It was just a lot easier.
Yeah.
You know, I could visualize the problems an awful lot better, so I quite enjoyed it.
And once you were qualified, where did you go from there?
I went to work for Cundall Johnston and Partners in Edinburgh. They were just a typical structural engineering company, but they also had mechanical, electrical engineers as well. So I got my first taste of services engineers asking for big, massive holes to put two cables through and stuff like that. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, and it's not really what happens, but it was the first interaction with another discipline, if you like, was inside that office. From there, I ended up moving to Glasgow to work for a variety of different companies, because when you leave uni, the only way that you can get your salary up is to basically move every couple of years. You know, you move, you get a pay rise, and then you stay there a couple of years, you move, you get a pay rise. And what I found was doing that kind of work, you get an awful lot of experience in designing portal frame sheds and hospitals and big projects. But these projects last for 18 months, 2 years, and it gets very, very samey. Yeah. You know, you're working on something, you're like, right, for the next 2 years of my life, I'm going to be designing this. And you're like, oh, God.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Regardless of how much you like your job, it's like working in a supermarket or something like that. You're doing the same thing again and again. And I just found that my enthusiasm for that was waning a little bit. And I got a job at the Scottish Parliament designing ballistics glass.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that quite interesting. Mostly because it's glass, it's see-through, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of engineers don't design glass because I think fundamentally because it's see-through. You know, it's like, oh, it's magic.
Yeah.
But it's essentially the same sort of maths as designing any other material. But I like that, and the jobs that I do at the moment, we can kind of pick and choose what we do, and we get to make some very sort of pretty things, because you can do some really nice, interesting things with glass as a material. So that's the kind of fun stuff that I do. But we also obviously do a lot of house extensions and stuff like that, because that just keeps pumping.
Well, there's reading through the book, and I must admit I did know this before I read the book, but I think we're a similar kind of age, and I remember, I'm not going to say it was on the front cover of FHM back in the day, but there was one particular building that you had a hand in. Do you want to tell the listeners about that one, or are you wishing I'd left that one out?
I actually put that in my CV at some point.
Did you?
We designed a shopping centre and cinema called Smarterland in Iceland, which looked like a cock and balls. If you Google it, it was actually an FHM, and I don't know where I kept the clipping on it, and I don't know where it went. I've tried to find it fairly recently, to be honest, to show somebody. But if you Google it, you can see, I don't know what the designer was thinking, honest to God. But when it came in in 3 stages. It actually genuinely came in as 3 different phases. Right? So the head of the penis was phase 1, that was the cinema. And then the mall section was the shaft, and then essentially phase 3 was the balls. But it came on 3 separate drawn sheets, basically.
Right.
It's
So you just didn't link it up.
Almost like the architect was trying to hide what you were actually making.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, that.
Well, you know, architects, they do like to make a statement, don't they? I guess, which probably brings me on to my next point about how some of these projects can be designed for the architect themselves rather than from the client. But I mean, from our perspective, we're predominantly an arboricultural consultancy. We do about, 60% arboriculture, 40% ecology, something like that. But one of the main areas of conflict between trees and any building that's coming along is the foundation design. And where we kind of trip over your profession is that we will put a very sweeping statement on the bottom of an impact assessment, which says something along the lines of the project partially impacts the root protection area of tree T1, a beautiful mature oak tree. Therefore, no excavation will be allowed, and the client will have to use piled foundations. And we leave it at that. And I guess probably reading your book, I'd realised how much of a hand grenade we'd lobbed in there, because although we always caveat it and say, you know, we're suggesting that as a methodology of overcoming damage to the tree. However, you need to be aware we're not structural engineers, and you will need the advice of a structural engineer. Now, what we've done in that single paragraph, cross-referencing with your book, is we've probably about quadrupled their cost of their foundation design. Would that be? That
would be round about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you're doing a house, say, and one elevation of it needs to be piled, you kind of need to do all of it.
Right.
Because the pile foundation is going to go all the way down to rock. It is not going to move at all. Anything that you do that isn't on a pile is going to at least compact the ground below it. Right, it's going to settle a little bit. So if you're piling one elevation of it, you're piling the whole house.
Right.
And depending on where Rockhead is, that could be quite a significant amount of additional money.
And what about, there's a particular job that we're involved in at the moment down south. It's in Reading it's somewhere down south. And this client, basically, he bought this house years ago, and it's got piled foundations. And he hadn't realised that the reason it's got piled foundation is that it's on a shrinkable soil. It's on London clay, and just off site is a large mature oak tree. And I'm sure you'll be aware, as much as I am, that quite often when a conservatory is thrown on the back of a house, it's got a very, very thin skim of concrete thrown onto the ground with the conservatory built over the top. So the thing that happened first was the conservatory peeled off the house, and I think they had it rebuilt by the insurance. Then it peeled off the house again. It's all right, we're having our photo taken. Pose. The conservatory peeled off the house. They had it rebuilt. It peeled off the house again. And he thought, I'm not going to have a conservatory here anymore. Then the garage started to crack and fall apart, because again, quite often the house foundation design will be appropriate for the soil type, but the garage is quite often just thrown down, isn't it, on whatever happens to be available. And this was all to do with this huge oak tree that was off site, protected by a tree preservation order, and the soil type. So he's got planning consent now to build a new extension, because he can't sell the house. He can't move. He's got to stay in this house now. So he's had a structural engineer involved who's specified the piled foundation and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm guessing that connection, what if you already had a house there with traditional foundations, and you're having an extension built that's got to have piled foundations? How do those two get tied together in any kind of sensible way then?
You obviously, your extension in your house, there will be a movement joint between the two of them, right? There would be a movement joint anyway, but you would just need to detail the movement joint so that you allowed for the fact that the house is going to bob up and down, because it's going to seasonally move a little bit, and the piled foundation part is just not going to move at all. So you just need to allow for that in the detailing between the two structures.
Yeah.
The problem arises where you have, obviously the house and the situation you're talking about isn't piled. Right?
No.
right? So it's now the extension that's piled, and it's piled purely because of the tree.
Tree, correct,
right?
yeah.
So the house is already settled as much as it's going to do through gravity. So any movement you get in the house is only because of the dewatering of the soil because of the tree seasonally. So that's going to be very minimal, realistically.
Yeah.
You know, not going to be that much. But you're going to have to take that up in the movement joint between the extension and the house, and just, it's just a bit of detail. It's not difficult. But normally where you have an extension next to a house, you would tie the two things together so you don't get any movement at the junction between the two.
Right.
Which is why if it was reversed and the house was piled and the extension was just on a normal strip foundation, what you would find is that the extension would literally rip away from the house.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Because the base wouldn't move when it was attached to the house because you had dowels connecting it, but the bit further away from the house would sink by a good few inches maybe.
Yeah.
And it would just rip the wall off. You get a triangular crack forming in it.
So at what stage? So let's assume this is a very, very common scenario. So the client has had their beautiful extension drawn up. Let's assume it's clay soil. So not only has it got to have very deep foundations anyway, but it's piled because of the tree. So the client has had this extension drawn. They may not have been aware of the fact that actually there was an issue between the trees and the clay soil. They've come to us because they've submitted their planning application. All of a sudden, they need a tree survey to get their planning application validated. Yeah. So we go there, we do our piece of work, and we say to them at that stage, right, you're going to have to use piled foundations for your extension, and at that stage, nothing changes from the architect's perspective because we're just talking about the foundations. So let's assume it all goes through planning. They get their planning consent, and then they've got to build the thing. And not only have they got to take into account the tree and tree protection, all that kind of stuff, they've got to have their foundation design carried out. Now, how would you approach that if somebody came to you at that stage? Would you run a mile? Because obviously in an ideal world, that all the structural engineering calculations should have been done much, much earlier on in the process, so it's not a shock to them.
Generally speaking, you would get planning permission for your house extension, right? And then you would do the building warrant calculation.
Yeah.
So it's quite often the case that you have planning and then you do the building warrant. It's quite unusual for us to be doing both things at the same time. So generally speaking, people will decide what they want it to look like.
Yeah.
They'll get planning on it, and then they'll do the building warrant. By that point, we'll have the tree preservation order or the report that you're going to give us telling us that we need to make it piled. Right? If we didn't have that, we would have to go and find out what the original house foundations were, so that just in case it was piled.
Yeah.
We can do that by contacting building control. They're going to have a copy anyway. Or we can do site investigation on the site, which very few people actually want to do, to be fair, because it's expensive. Or we can go to the British Geological Survey and get the records of the historic site investigation that was done, so that, cause, the ground's going to be the same. But generally speaking, you're going to want to do some kind of SI on the site, just to confirm what the ground is. But once we've done that, and we decide, it's going to have to be piled, then we just need to detail it as being piled. The piles themselves are generally not designed by the structural engineer who's designed the house. You would go to whoever the local piling company is, because you'll find you'll have 2 or 3 different options for what type of pile to put in. And it's not our job to pick one unless there's a benefit to using that particular pile. It all comes down to cost.
Well, that's basically what I'm getting at with this, I guess, is that people should really be doing their research early on, because they think once they get that decision notice through in their hand, they've had a rough idea of build cost perhaps from the architect, and then all of a sudden they found that their foundation design has trebled, quadrupled in cost. At that stage, I mean, are you the bad guy? Is that what you experience at that stage?
We're often the bad guy, and we're often put under quite a lot of pressure to make it work as a raft foundation or traditional foundations. What if we don't do this? What's the worst case that'll happen? What if I write you a letter saying that it's okay if my house starts to sink? And when that happens, you just have to walk away for the job, to be fair. But there is always the possibility it's not going to be that expensive. You might find the rock head's quite shallow. You might find that because of the size of the extension, you only need maybe half a dozen piles or something like that. But it is all additional money.
Yes.
You know? But at the moment with COVID and what's happened with building materials and things like that, the cost per square metre to go away and build anything has almost doubled in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
Right. So what we've saw in our office certainly is a lot of people who got planning permission and the building want to design a big house extension come back and scale it down because they just can't afford it anymore. But when it comes to piles, it kind of is what it is. If you want to go away and design your house extension and pay for your house extension, which might very well be 70,000, 80,000 pounds, are you really going to skimp on 10 grand worth of piling and risk it sinking?
Yeah.
You know, and if you can find an engineer, and you will find an engineer, there will be somebody somewhere that will go away and give you a design that says it'll be okay with strip foundations, right? Or you'll find a builder who's quite happy to go away and put strip foundations in and pretend it's piled.
Yeah.
Right, which is quite
slightly terrifying, that.
It's just the way it is. You know, as engineers, we're never paid to go and check the work as it's on site. People don't want to pay us to go and have a look at things when it's getting built. So we'll put stuff on drawings, but we don't have any ability to make sure that that's actually what's built, because people don't even tell us it's happening.
No. Well, we have exactly the same. We'll get clients to have a decision notice come through, never tell us about it. Yeah. They start work on site. 3 months into it, the tree officer does a random visit and says, "Well, hang on. Rover said that you were going to have tree protection fencing, ground protection boarding, arboricultural clerk of works. Where is it? Where's the records?" And then you go to site and there's almost nothing that you can do to make it good. All the damage has been done at that stage. So it's deeply frustrating. Chris, you've been absolutely brilliant with your time here, but there's one last thing that I want to ask you about, and that's this whole cryptocurrency thing. So give the listeners a bit of an overview. This is not a subject that we normally cover on this podcast, but give us a high level overview of what it is that you've done here, because it sounds fantastic, and what the ultimate aim of it sounds brilliant.
My wife and I, we would give money to our local food bank.
Yeah.
And what I found was that if you're giving money to the food bank, obviously you get to know the people that are running it and things like that, and you turn up and you get quite involved in it and quite attached to it. But regardless of how much money we as a couple give, it makes no difference at all, right? But you get to see the people who are going to the food bank, and you get to know some of them. And what you find is that these aren't generally people who are on benefits or they're unemployed, or some of them are people who have 2 jobs, right?
Yeah.
But they actually don't have, and this was before COVID. Well, it was not before the electricity price and everything went mental. These are people who have got 2 jobs but still can't afford food, which is just can't be right, you know.
No.
But we also invest in cryptocurrency ourselves, and we thought, there's a lot of money in crypto. Maybe we can do something that will allow us to fund food banks through a cryptocurrency. And it was a silly idea that I thought, well, let's see if maybe we can do it, right? So I taught myself how to code. I went on a little course online, and it was like 200 hours of learning how to code.
Oh my God.
And I wrote the actual contract for the cryptocurrency and deployed it on the Binance chain. And once that was there, people started to buy it, right? And a portion of each transaction, each buy and sell, 5% of it goes towards the charity wallet.
Yeah.
And we managed quite quickly to raise about £50,000 in the charity wallet.
That's incredible.
Which is an awful lot of money, and it could do an awful lot of good.
Yeah.
I've not looked at the moment to see how much money's in it now, but we've only just released an app where people can vote for the next food bank to get a donation off us.
Oh, right, okay.
Because just before Christmas, we donated money to a food bank in Manchester, because none of the food banks close to where I live in Glasgow wanted the money. They all thought I was at it, and I don't. it was a bizarre situation. I was phoning people up going, look, £60,000 to give to your food bank.
Yeah.
It's in cryptocurrency. You're going to have to do a few things for me to give it to you, and then you can transfer it to your bank account.
Yeah.
And they were all like, aye, right, son, aye, that sounds right. Aye, and people hanging up and stuff. And you're like, this is unbelievable. I've got a lot of money to give away and nobody wants it.
That's amazing.
But I found a food bank that was in Manchester that was going to shut down just before Christmas. So we donated money to them, and it was really easy. It was just a case of us sending the cryptocurrency to an app on their phone. They converted it into actual money and then transferred it into their bank account.
It's amazing, isn't it? When you're close to something and familiar with it, it all sounds extremely straightforward, which I guess brings this conversation completely full circle, really. You know, it's very, very familiar to you, the whole cryptocurrency thing. And I've listened to a few podcasts on it, whereas, you know, generally the vast majority of people out there, the general public, and I guess possibly a lot of the people that are involved in those charitable organisations tend to be the older generation as well, and that does put a barrier in place.
Yeah, so. I think a lot of the problem that we were having was that most charities, most food banks have trustees, and the trustees tend to be pensioners that have a little bit more time on their hands to deal with these things, and they would rather be given a big wad of cash rather than something transferred into the bank account. And I can understand that.
Yes.
Right, I totally get that. But if you're doing something as a cryptocurrency and you're donating on behalf of the people who hold that token, it all needs to be electronic so that the people who hold the token can see that the money has went from our wallet on the blockchain. It's went from our wallet to the food bank who's receiving the money's wallet, right? And it hasn't came from the food bank crypto wallet into my personal wallet, and then I've went to the bank to convert it into pound notes, right? Because that just looks as though I've stolen money.
Yes.
You know, and that would be regardless of what I did in the back end of that to prove that I gave it to the food bank, there would always be somebody going, but you took half of that money for yourself. People are just wild that way these days.
It is, it's sad, isn't it?
Especially if you're putting stuff up on Facebook, you know. If you put something up on Facebook, you almost certainly just going to get a whole load of negative comments, regardless of what good you've done. So it had to be completely transparent for people who are in the crypto community to go away and see that we transferred it to this wallet that's got nothing to do with me, and that wallet address is on the food bank's website, so that they could check to make sure that's actually them getting the cash. And then we got a few posts from the food bank saying thanks very much, this has helped us do the following things, and some pictures and stuff like that. And we got a tweet from Sally from Coronation Street as well, which was
very good.
A big thing for me.
Straight over my head, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've not watched Coronation Street for a long time, but I know who Sally from Coronation Street is, so that was a big thing. But yeah, it had to be completely transparent. But unfortunately, when you're giving money to a food bank or something like that, there seems to be a reluctance to believe that what you're saying is true, because you're not giving them £5 or £10, you're giving them tens of thousands of pounds.
The due diligence around that's quite complicated, I guess, from their perspective. But Chris, listen, you've been absolutely brilliant. It's been fantastic to go right from structural engineering through to food banks and cryptocurrency. I bet people weren't expecting that. So we'll put all your details in the site notes. But I guess how can people reach you? What's the best way to reach you if they've got a question?
If they have a question, the best place would be probably on Facebook. Just go to Ask the Structural Engineer. Just type it into the search field at the top.
Fantastic.
You'll get a little baldy character in a circle, and that's me. And just ask whatever question you've got. I don't mind. I'm quite happy to go away and answer anybody's question, because if I can stop somebody doing something utterly silly to their house, like once a week, I feel as though I've done something good. That's our mission as well. Thanks a lot, Chris. It's been great. Safe travels home, and I will speak to you soon. Yeah, thanks very much.